Um, Welcome everybody to this discussion, which is very short for the topic that we have at hand. 40 minutes is very little time to discuss Indian publishing in the languages. I think the title itself gives us a starting point because the this very repulsive word that Indian languages have been known by in many circles, which is vernacular. It's something we've been trying to move away from in the publishing industry for some time. Um, Indian languages, publishing industry in India has its origins in Indian languages. If it weren't for the languages, the printing press would not have thrived in India. The first book that was published ever of an Indian, or in India, or any Indian book that was published was a book in Tamil, but it was published in Lisbon. When the press came to India too, the first language that was published by the printing press in India was again a publication in Tamil. So Tamil has a very long history of publishing, and therefore it has a long tradition as an industry, a publishing industry, and we'll discuss some of that here today. But in the past, to just give a very brief overview, and this is a very brief overview because you cannot condense the history of publishing in just 4 minutes, but I'm going to try. The missionaries in India are responsible for creating many of the infrastructures, much of the infrastructure that was required by early publishing, which was the press, the typefaces, the fonts, etc. And this was done to create resources like dictionaries and grammars in addition to translations of Bible and Psalms and other liturgical texts. But the first publishing enterprise, if you see it as an enterprise, was the Serampore Press, which was set up in 1800s by William Carey. And there, because Carey was a polyglot who was very interested in teaching and in education, he created a multilingual publishing setup. And this publishing house in 31 years, in fact, published 212,000 books in 40 different languages. This was in the 1800s, in the early 19th century. By 1835, when the language of the court was changed from Persian to English, and therefore medium of instruction in English was also introduced in the schooling system, the thrust in publishing in English began in India. And then, of course, post-independence, because of the creation of linguistic states in mainland India, because Northeast India is not really divided according to languages, and neither is the northernmost state in India. But most of the Indian states in mainland India have been structured according to languages. And this also was the time when the government of India decided to give emphasis to language publishing and created the two big bodies, which is Sahitya Academy and National Book Trust, for multilingual publishing as well as for encouraging translations between languages. In effect, the government of India is the largest publisher in the country, but that is because it is the largest publisher of textbooks for primary schools, for schools rather. So English language publishers in the education space really operate mainly in higher education. But this discussion today is not between publishers who are focused on education publishing. This is what we call in publishing industry terms trade publishing, which is the literary and non-fiction literary publishing. However, just to give a very sort of breakup of how languages work in the publishing sphere, in 2004, and that is the last time any such survey was done on publishing in Indian languages. It's unfortunate that we don't have good statistics on current statistics, but this is a fairly good indication even by our observation and anecdotal kind of research. The Federation of Indian Publishers surveyed books produced in 18 languages, including Sanskrit. These were about 82,000 books. And from that, they gathered that Hindi was 26% of books published, English was 23. That ratio has changed now. It's almost 25-25 when you look at it. Tamil is 9% of the entire publishing pie. Bangla was 7%, Marathi was 7%, Malayalam, Gujarati, Telugu are in the range of 3 to 4%. But this, of course, is no indication of per capita, because that is very important to understand how books are produced, how many speakers, how many books to how many speakers, and that is something we need to compute and calculate to get a better understanding of this. In the digital world, of course, the growth of languages in publishing has, in digital publishing especially, has been curtailed by several factors like non-adoption of standardized fonts and keyboard layouts. So this is why there has been slower growth in the internet, but the trends are now much more positive because Unicode fonts are being used and keyboard layouts have come in, and we see a lot more content being generated in the digital space as also in the digital workflow of books. So these are some of the reasons that have affected. But in our discussion today, we would like to not just talk about challenges in publishing, because in fact, each of the publishing industries in the languages have their own unique strengths, and they sort of are able to reach to their readers and create books in very unique ways. And one important thing to remember in Indian languages publishing is that it is not a uniform scene. And when we talk about Indian language publishing in English, it almost always we bracket it as one category, but it isn't, because each language has grown differently, and publishing in each of these languages has a very different trajectory. And some of these aspects we'll bring it out in this panel here today. We are represented by two strong languages of the South, which is Tamil and Malayalam. Kannan Sundaram is publisher of Kalachuvadu books, as well as editor and director of Kalachuvadu magazine, which is a monthly journal for politics and culture. And he has pioneered translations into Tamil, has featured new writing in Tamil, and has now, vast experience in Tamil publishing. Prema Revathi is a writer, actor, translator, many hats she has worn. She runs a school in coastal Tamil Nadu for tribal children, as well as she has worked in films, and has started a new feminist publishing house called Maitri. She'll tell us more about that. Rubin is presently the Malayalam editor for National Book Trust. In the past, he has held different positions in various public sector organizations related to publishing. He was the director of the Kerala State Institute for Children's Literature, and in that capacity, he has edited a magazine for children's literature and has published several books too. So he will tell us more about the Malayalam publishing industry. I'd like Kannan to begin by his opening remarks about Tamil publishing.
Among the Indian languages, Tamil was probably the first language where books were printed nearly 4 centuries ago. And professional Tamil publishing is nearly 100 years old. One of our oldest publishing firms, the Saiva Siddhanta Kadagam, became a private limited company nearly 90 years ago. Since then, many publishers have thrived in publishing in the last 100 years. Yet I would say that in a sense, Tamil publishing came of age only in this millennium. Independent publishers who combined ideology, their idealism, with business and professionalism have begun to thrive and grow only in this millennium. Literary publications, non-party left publications, Dalit publications, academic and research publications have managed to sustain themselves by publishing good quality books only in the last decade or so. In the last century, we did have many brilliant publishers who did path-breaking work, but they could not sustain, grow, and thrive in the book culture that was prevalent then. Also, Tamil publishing was confined to a very thin, creamy layer of the society. Most of our early publishers were either Natukota Chettiars or Brahmins, or mostly from the very upper caste. But I think the last decade, publishing has become representative. Even writing, publishing has become quite representative of the entire Tamil society in a sense. I think there is a broad consensus now in Indian publishing that Tamil publishing is probably the fastest growing Indian language publishing today in India. And here I am not just referring to the Tamil book culture alone. I also understand from good sources that even English books among the Indian states, they sell quite highly in Tamil Nadu. Again, it was only in this millennium, Tamil writers are being paid royalty quite systematically since publishing began 100 years ago. Also, Tamil writers only in the last decade or so have begun to hear about a document called a publishing contract. And only I think in this millennium that the publisher-writer relationship has ceased to be a feudal relationship and become a more professional relationship. Among all these positive aspects, I think the one big letdown has been the role of Tamil and English media. The media, I think, has largely failed to recognize the growth in Tamil publishing in the last 10 to 15 years. If they had given us even 10% of the space and attention they give it to Tamil movie industry, our growth rate might have doubled. Tamil Nadu now has quite a broad-based education and economy is quite well developed. But equivalent to that, Tamil publishing industry is not growing because media is not playing the role of disseminating information on publishing and writers to the public. Another big challenge for Tamil publishing is that most of our educational institutions have become centers of unlearning. Our young book readers are only survivors of these centers of unlearning. Here I must credit the Tamil media and movie industry for spreading Tamil despite our government's education policy, which is almost to destroy Tamil as a language. Thank you.
I request Rubin to give us an overview of Malayalam publishing.
Good morning, everyone. I would say Malayalam publishing industry is one of the successful and mature industries of Indian languages. In two senses, it serves the most of its readership. Two, it is qualitatively better among other Indian language systems. So, to reach this stage, I think there was a long-term investment of many factors. Say now, one major publisher in Kerala have a chain of bookshops with more than 45 outlets. For a small state like Kerala, such a strong network of bookshops is very, very, powerful. And there are other publishers also who have 10 shops, who have 6 shops, like that. Qualitative and the number of titles being published is also very high. Say it could be around 10 new titles a day. And still there is a strong resistance to populist, there are populist books, but very low quality pulp kind of work, there is big resistance. Third, another feature of Malayalam publishing, or another strength of Malayalam publishing is its affordability. I think one of the most affordable publishing system in Indian language. I mean, most of Indian language publishing is, you can't survive if it is not affordable. But Malayalam has experimented it for a long time. So, as Vinutha mentioned, this like other Indian publishing systems, Malayalam publishing systems also have the history of missionary work, missionary initiatives, and other industrialist earlier publishing efforts, and even progressive individuals like A.K.T.K. Namboodiripad starting Mangalodayam books, which have started publishing books by the progressive writers of Kerala. But there was in early 40s and till mid, there was 3 organizations which spearheaded the current to the current situation of Malayalam publishing. One is the Progressive Writers Association, which is called Purogamana Kala Sahitya Purogamana Sahitya Prasthanam, which started around 1938, and the library movement, which started in 1945, and Sahitya Pravartaka Cooperative Society, which started again in 1945. These two are celebrating their 70th anniversary this year. Progressive writers movement created new kind of literature which people were looking for, and the library movement, with its now I think around 12,000 libraries registered to the Kerala State Library Council, and they made these writers' books available to everywhere, and the SPCS published them, and so the SPCS, these 3 associations were mutually beneficial. For SPCS is a writers' cooperative union publisher, which offered 30% royalty to the authors. There were no middle person between writer and the author. And these 3 organizations were of mutual benefit, and that helped Malayalam publishing to go ahead in big leaps. And by 1980s, this strength of these organizations started coming down, and then new private publishing companies came up, but they were also influenced by the institutions and used these established systems of these institutions and so reached the current situation. Should I talk about the problems now?
Yeah, quickly.
Yeah. In one sentence, if I say that though the Malayalam publishing industry is very successful even financially, but I doubt how much it contributes back to the intellectual life of Kerala. It only receives from the intellectual life of Kerala and supply it to the people. Say, for example, for non-fiction academic works or children's books, where publishers have to invest, Malayalam publishing industry hardly done anything.
Okay. I'd like you to tell us why you chose such a niche area to publish in Tamil, and how do you see it, see the scope for it in Tamil publishing, feminist publishing?
Working now? Yeah. Thank you, Vinutha. This whole session has been like it's almost like I took a class from 3 of you, because we are really young and it's a nascent publishing house. Our publishing house is called Maitri. We took this name from B.R. Ambedkar's quote, I would like to quote this here. Love is not enough. What is required is Maitri. It is wider than love. It means fellowship, not merely with human beings, but with all living beings. Is not such Maitri necessary? What else can give? What else can give to all living beings the same happiness which one seeks for one's own self, to keep the mind impartial, open to all, with affection for everyone and hatred for none? We take this as our motto. It's a slightly different take on the feminist mottos. Not that we would like to abandon what the feminist movement stood for in the past years, but we also want to talk about the social fellowship. If not the feminists, we don't know who is going to talk about this. So that being our philosophy, we wanted to be chose bookmaking, because I think books is one of the most peaceful, most sensible and most rational ways to converse with people, because it's becoming so difficult to talk to people about so many things, leave alone women's issues or violence against women or violence against children. Conversations are becoming so complicated. Even writers and publishers are facing difficulties, but still we think books are one of the most rational and intelligent way to talk to people. And we being feminists, and when we decided to publish books, we decided to start a feminist publishing house. Why in Tamil? Because as we all know, there are so many feminists in Tamil Nadu or Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh. Mostly in our towns and villages, they do not call themselves feminists. They call that their life. They all struggle, they fight, almost with similar values, but they don't essentially call themselves feminists. But when we wanted to start a publishing house, we wanted to bring these stories from the small towns and villages. I wouldn't claim that we are the ones who are going to bring these stories for the first time. A lot of books have come like that in languages and all that. But I do believe that life happens in languages, you know. Vernacular, I don't know about that word. But life when we say, of course life happens in English also, like some of our lives happen. But the majority life of a landscape happens in its language. And so we want to bring out those stories from those villages and small towns, and women who work, women who perform, women who are in the public space, but women who are just homemakers in many various capacities. That's why we started Maitri. We brought out only one label, which is called Lakshmi Enum Payani. This is a really heroic story of 60-year-old Lakshmi Amma, who's a industrial worker. She's a school dropout, starts working in a banyan factory, marries this big communist leader who was a trade union leader during emergency when they were all in underground. And the book follows her life. She is herself a leader in her own right, though she is not one of those big leaders of the party. Her husband has become a political leader in another movement now. But Lakshmi Enum Payani as a book essentially captures what happens to these women. When we see so many of these male leaders, what really helps them to spend so much time on public life, and who really takes care of their houses. Because when women try to become leaders, they have to take care of their houses also, not just political leaders in any business or in any field. So that's our first book, and we're planning to launch a second and third books in the coming book fair. The book that we're working on right now is a memoir of Maithili Shivaraman. She is one of the founders of the All India Democratic Women's Association and a union leader with CPM again. And unfortunately, Maithili can't write her own memoir because she's been affected by Alzheimer's. So this is a memoir. It's a different project. It's been a very emotionally disturbing and enriching project for us, because we're trying to bring out that memoir from other people's memories of Maithili, people who have worked with her in the trade union, people who have been with her in these meetings and all these things. That's our second book, and that's what we aim to publish also. Maithili aims to publish mainly memoirs, so we'll be a competitor to Kannan because he's brought out some 6 important memoirs in Tamil, some of them from translation, so we'll be competing with Kannan on that. And we aim to bring anthologies based on feminist themes, and also introducing feminist theory into Tamil. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. Kannan, taking off from that point, we were discussing earlier about how it is only in the recent past that what was otherwise known as academic themes in English publishing is now becoming sort of niche publishing within the languages, whether it is feminist themes, whether it is caste-related themes, minority-related themes. These were not traditionally in the languages when they started. So these are new to the language publishing, especially in Tamil, as you've observed. Not so much. I think Malayalam has a longer history of it. So when did this start happening in Tamil and why?
Like I said, I think when we published a book by R. Sivasubramanian on caste and Christianity in 2002 probably, we thought we'll do a very small imprint of the book. But then I think we have done now about 6 to 7 editions, which was a surprise to us. It was definitely a surprise to the author. But writing a research or an academic book in a language that is accessible to readers, I think that is very important. Subramanian is a very good research scholar, but he is not a professor. Now the best way not to sell a book in Tamil is to mention before the name that he is a professor. If we say it is Perase Ra Subramanian, nobody will touch that book. So first you have to hide that if they are professors, don't mention it anywhere in the book. Don't say it in the name, don't say it in the blurb. Because that means they'll employ a very dry academic language which doesn't. So I think over the last 10 years, we have had a series of scholars who are writing with a depth of research, but in a language that is accessible and interesting to readers. I can mention Sivasubramanian, I can talk about Chalapati, I can talk about Adiyaman, and various other scholars. Salan Rajangam writes very well about Dalit issues, and there is Dharmarajan, there is Ravi Kumar. So all these people write up in an interesting language to the readers, which they can understand, but also there is a depth of research behind both the writings, and not necessarily they are all professors. I think even the overall, can you hear me? Yeah. So the overall role of academic institutions in research in Tamil Nadu, I think is very minimal. It is people who are working beyond academic institutions who are taking up this job of researching on their own time and publishing very important books.
Rubin, in the Malayalam industry, of course, in the industry, but the role of state support, even for an agency like SPCS, when SPCS was going under, it was the government that came to its rescue. And we've seen the role of the state in publishing in other ways in Sahitya Academy and through other Sahitya Parishads in the states. So what has been its pluses and minuses? I mean, what are the pros and cons of state support to language publishing? Very quickly, we have very little time, so if we could be...
I am an advocate of state support to Indian language publishing because it is the responsibility of the state to support Indian language development. Full stop. But, and there is a lot are being, I mean, from the time of new independent India, from the forefathers, I mean, from Jawaharlal Nehru's time itself, there are many initiatives, including Sahitya Academy and National Book Trust and language institutes in states, etc. There are a lot of criticism about their works also. But I would say that there are a lot of things are done, but not anyway. Say, for example, take the work of National Book Trust, where I work. The task of National Book Trust is to create reading culture in India, promote reading culture. It's such a mammoth task. You have a small organization with 200 people with a very minuscule budget, and with this huge country of so many million people. So we have not done enough. We are not provided enough to the organizations which is working for that. But still there are, say, for example, translations from one Indian language to other Indian languages were being done as part of spirited individuals who were part of national movement. For example, in Malayalam, there were, I can mention at least 2 important translators who have translated from Bangla and Urdu, M.N. Satyarthi and Sri Ravi Verma. These two persons who have contributed their entire life to translate from these languages into Malayalam, which enriched Malayalam in a big way. But that institutions like NBT or Sahitya Akademi could not take it forward much. Now, what I would suggest is that there are lessons to be learned from these experiences of these institutions. But we have to look forward for a cooperation with such institutions and private initiatives of individuals and publishers.
Yes, this is again a topic I know many of us have different opinions on, but we are short on time. So
I'm in the field of education, specifically professional education, okay, which is in my case management education. Now, sorry, I'm in this field of education, okay, and specifically management education. Now, in Tamil Nadu, you have a lot of bright people who are actually very, very weak in English. So, unless the matter can be brought to them in vernacular, it's going to be difficult. Now, in Kerala, that is not, according to me, from what I have found with my students, it's not a problem in Kerala. But in Tamil Nadu, it is a serious problem. So, what are you doing in terms of technical and professional education? What kind of titles, what kind of support do you provide? One. Second, publishing in Tamil, technical and professional books on management and various topics like that. That's one. Second is, in what way are you using technology to make publishing more accessible to people? For example, by using e-publishing rather than having books and then bookstores and people having to keep inventories and the cost going up and all that. What are all of you doing in vernacular publishing in this? Do you have titles on Kindle and various other things like that, or is everything just on paper? These are my two questions.
before, I'll just take the first part of that question just to clarify. The publishers here represent trade and not educational publishing, which is a separate domain. So I don't think you publish academically, academic publications.
What I want to say is that you're talking about books on management and, self-confidence. There are publishers who are very active in Tamil doing that. There is Kiraka Publications, there is Kannadasan Publication. They are not represented here, but they are doing that work and they are publishing hundreds of titles every year. So that market is being covered. It's not that that market is open. Also, when it comes to e-books, the impact of e-books in Indian publishing so far has been quite minimal. They just entered the Indian English book market and to a certain extent Malayalam book market. In Tamil Nadu, we have not yet felt the pressure to go very fast into the e-book market. We are doing, some of my books are available in e-book, but the response I won't say is so great that we are compelled to bring all our books in e-books. The response has been quite minimal. So when the response improves, we'll also adapt to the new conditions. Thank you.
But just to add to that, the National Translation Mission has been tasked with bringing textbooks and knowledge texts into different languages. They're of course working in their own way to do this, but this is their mandate, and they have done a survey to find out which areas are deficient, which subjects especially, and where the requirements are. So some of this work is happening also through the National Translation Mission, but we do have a long, long way to go in terms of making books available in textbooks available in languages. There was another hand here.
This question is to Kannan Sundaram. Kannan, you published Perumal Murugan's Mother Bahan, and last year also you were here. You must have faced many challenges as a publisher. Can you just share some of the challenges you faced after Perumal Murugan decided not to write any longer?
I think we have only 2 more minutes, so I don't have time to talk in detail about this. But what I want to say is that the final hearing on the Perumal Murugan case is probably on Monday, and we are hoping that there will be a judgment which is towards freedom of expression from the High Court anytime this month or probably next month. So that's what I'm looking forward to now. What has happened over the last year has already happened. I am hoping that the judgment will create a situation where I am able to at least publish his older books which he has already written. When he can write again, when he can come out of this hurtful, deeply affecting incident, that we have to wait and see. But I'm hoping at least this year I'll be able to publish his already published titles and issue them to readers. Thank you.
I have a small question. Ma'am, it's kind of, it's for you. Now that Maitri is the voice of the women, as I understand, do you think that bilingual publishing might make more sense? And I would also like to ask the others, have you looked at bilingual publishing as well? Because the global citizenship, it is very important that, you know, the voices are heard and read in both the languages, as English might also help the vernacular people to be more fluent or will be able to communicate. I was just wondering about the bilingual publishing.
Yes, absolutely. We would want all our books to come in English also. Which publisher wouldn't want to? And also stories like Lakshmi Amma's story or memoirs like Maithili's are meant for consumption by everybody everywhere. When I said about language and things, we chose to start a publishing house as a predominantly Tamil publishing house, but we are working with other publishing houses because we just a small nascent publishing house. To start right away as a bilingual publishing house is it's a huge business. At the business level, it's a different ball game altogether. So we would like to work with other established English feminist publishing houses to bring our titles in English also. So I'm not against bilingual publishing at all, but I hope maybe in 10 years time we will become a bilingual publishing house.
Any more questions from the audience? I see a hand here. If the mic could please reach.
I'd like to know from our Kannan sir, do you have any idea of publishing some books of your concerns to be published in English? For instance, the Vidupuram riot that has been published by you in Tamil, if it is released in English on behalf of your publication, the entire world will come to know about that. Do you have any idea such books are to be published in English?
See, so far I have confined myself only to publishing Tamil. There is so much work for us to be done. I don't think we have the time or energy to get into another language publication. Also that, you know, when you publish in English, the distribution is a completely different game, that it has to be on all India level, which is not something I think we can cope with. We have done 1 or 2 bilingual books, writings of Bharati and writings of 4 women poets. So from that, what I have learned is it is not very easy to distribute English books. It's not very easy to get into English book marketing. We are not experts in editing English, personally. So all these things together, I don't have a plan to get into English publishing now. When it comes to publishing Tamil work like the Vidupuram riots you have mentioned, I think we can only sell rights to English publishers. It is their role to bring such researchers to English. But the limitation I have seen so far is if a research work is based only on Tamil Nadu, then it is much more difficult for an English language publisher to take it up and publish in English. If it is more broad based, if it covers the whole nation, if there is a book written in Tamil that speaks about health issues across India, then it might be easier to get that book to English.
Thank you. We'll have to close with that. In conclusion, I'd just like to also add that when we discuss language publishing in India, we are almost always talking about only the 24 officially recognized languages that Sahitya Academy publishes in, and therefore the state gives support to. But there are countless more languages, many that are not written in scripts, that are in the oral tradition, that do not receive any attention and support. And some of these aspects have been highlighted by Professor Ganesh Devi in his research through the People's Linguistic Survey of India. And some of these elements should be a part of this discussion. I'm sorry that we've not had time for it in this short time, but hopefully we could open this up in future discussions on Indian languages publishing. Thank you all for joining us here today, and to you all for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.